Tantor Audio presents 30 Nights with a Highland Husband by Melissa Mayhue, narrated by Elizabeth Wiley. Prologue. The Legend of the Faerie Glen. Long, long ago, on a beautiful spring day in the Highlands of Scotland, a prince of the Fae folk peered through the curtain separating his world from that of the mortals. There, deep in a glen Pole thought of as his own, he saw a beautiful young woman gathering herbs. He watched her for a very long time, until her basket was nearly full, and he knew he had fallen in love with this innocent mortal. His love was so great for this woman that he was able to slip through a crack in the curtain between their worlds. Pole appeared to the maiden in his true magnificence, making no effort to disguise himself, for he knew she must love him for what he was. Rose had wandered deep into the forest that day gathering her herbs, and she had become entranced by the serenity of the glen. When Pole appeared before her, his beauty stole her breath away, and she knew at once that this was her own true love. Pole and Rose dwelt happily in their idyllic glen next to the little stream where first he had seen her. But after a mortal year together, Pole was forced to return to his own world, for in those days, far in the misty recesses of time, the Fae abided by very strict rules. One of those rules governed how long one of their own could remain outside the realm of Faerie. Once returned to his own world, Pole would be unable to pass through the barrier again for a full century. And though 100 years was nothing in the lifespan of a Fae, Pole knew his Rose would be no more at the end of that time. Rose returned to her family, knowing her prince was lost to her forever. At first, Rose's father, the old laird, was ecstatic that his little Rose had returned to him, even hearing her fantastic story of the Fae Prince with whom she had spent the past year. Soon, however, it became apparent that Rose was with child, and her father and brothers were furious. Not only was their Rose a ruined woman, but to their way of thinking, she had been defiled by a devious, unholy creature of magic. They began to treat her not as their beloved daughter and sister, but as their most reviled servant. Rose toiled in the hot kitchens from sunrise to sundown each day, and suffered all manner of indignity, but she didn't care, because her heart was gone from her. Her reason for living had disappeared with Pole. Meanwhile, Pole could only watch with growing dismay, unable to pass through the curtain separating their worlds, as his beloved Rose slipped farther and farther away. Finally the day came when Rose delivered her babes, 3 strong, healthy, beautiful girls. But Rose, whose spirit was damaged by the loss of her one true love, did not survive their birth. Rose's father refused to look upon the faces of the infants, and decreed that they should be taken deep into the forest and left for the fairies to whom they belonged, or the wolves. He cared not which claimed the infants first. The old laird himself led the small party deep into the forest. As fate would have it, they were in the very same glen where Pole had watched Rose for the first time. The old laird ordered the infants to be laid on the grassy forest floor near a small, shallow stream. Rose's brothers, who had each carried an infant, laid the babes on the ground and remounted their horses in preparation to leave the glen. Pole, watching at the curtain between the worlds, was livid with rage and racked with grief. Not only was his beloved Rose gone from the world, but now her children, his children, were being cruelly abandoned. His tormented cry of anguish reached his queen, who, in a rare moment of pity, broke the rules and opened the curtain just enough to allow Pole to slip through. The wind suddenly began to howl through the tiny glen, and thunder rumbled ominously. The ground around the old laird's party heaved and shook, and the old laird himself was thrown from his horse to the forest floor. He and his sons watched in horror as boulders pushed up from beneath the earth in the very center of the stream, piling higher and higher, one upon another. There they formed a magnificent waterfall and a deep crystal pool where only moments before a shallow stream had flowed. Paul rose slowly from the depths of the pool, choosing to play upon the individual terrors of the men by appearing to each of the mortals as that which they most feared.
"I am Paul, a prince of the Fae, and you,"
he swept his arm to include the brothers as well as the father,
"have incurred my wrath. Now you will pay the penalty."
His gaze turned to the helpless infants lying nearby, all three strangely quiet and untouched by the tumult around them.
"These are my daughters. My blood runs strongly in them."
Paul moved to the infants, gently picking up each one in turn.
"I name each of you for your mother, my beloved Rose. For all time, your daughters shall carry a form of her name to ensure that her memory will live on in this world forever. I give each of you my mark and my blessing. Know this glen as the home of your mother and your father."
Paul turned back to the old laird.
"I charge you with the care and safety of my daughters."
"Never,"
the old laird hissed. "They are your abominations. You take them. Neither I nor my sons will shelter your spawn at our hearth." "Oh, but you will, old man, and you'll be grateful to do so."
The shape of the Fae Prince shimmered and grew until it filled the entire glen, surrounding the old laird and his sons, weighing them down with the power and the fury of the being they had angered, blocking everything else from their view and their minds. Paul smiled with evil satisfaction. Well he knew the weaknesses of mortal men. His voice rang in their minds, all the more terrible for not being spoken out loud.
"Should you or any male of the family fail to nurture and protect my daughters, hurt them or allow anyone else to hurt them, prevent them from making their own choices in life, or deprive them of finding their one true love, you shall suffer my curse. You will bear no male offspring. Any sons already living will suffer the same fate. You will be unable to enjoy the intimate company of any female ever again. Your line will die out, and your name cease to exist in your world."
Paul waited for the full impact of his words to sink into their minds. Then he continued,
"My blessing on my daughters, and thus my accompanying curse, will carry forward for all time, passed from mother to daughter. As even the smallest drop of my blood flows in their body, so they will have the power to call on me and all Fae to aid them. My mark upon them, and upon all the daughters of their line, guarantees all men know the penalty they will suffer for harming my beloved daughters."
As Paul's terrible voice reverberated in the minds of the old laird and his sons, his form shifted and shimmered around the infants, enveloping them for the first time, and the last, in the emerald glow of his love. The old laird still lay on the ground where he had fallen, trembling with fear, and although he could not see the infants through the green mist surrounding them, he could hear what sounded impossibly like children's laughter. Just before the mist faded, each of the men present felt an ominous warning echo through his mind.
"Never forget."
Later, much later, the old laird and his sons crept close to the infants to find them sleeping contentedly, each one bearing the mark of the Fae Prince. The old laird gently gathered up his granddaughters, for so they must now be to him, and hurried from the glen. Paul's daughters grew and prospered, and eventually married, having families of their own. In time to come, though many generations of the Fae Prince's offspring traveled and spread to varied parts of the world, all the men of all the lines continued to honor the legend of the Fairy Glen. Chapter 1. Scythian Fardach, the Highlands of Scotland, 1272. The clatter of metal on stone rang through the air, even as the goblet spun slowly to a stop on the floor where it had landed.
"Tantrums will not be helping you, laddie."
The old warrior shook his head, warily eyeing his companion sitting at the far end of the great table.
"You only waste good ale."
Connor MacKiernan glared at him. It was a look that had weakened the knees of many a strong man.
"Nothing will help me now. I am as the weak, helpless fool, all my options closed save one."
He dropped his head into the crook of his arm on the table.
"I am a king's knight, yet my sword might as well be a woman's pretty feather for all that I can do."
He spat the words as if they soured and burned his mouth.
"I dinna want to involve Rosalind. This is not my aunt's trouble, Duncan, but mine. I am to protect my family, not to place them in greater danger."
Duncan pushed back from the table, laughing.
"The Lady Rosalind would, I wager, see things very differently, Connor. Didn't she tell you her plan would make everything work out just as you need?"
"Aye." Connor lifted his head only enough to peer up over his arm.
"And that's what worries me. There is no regular way out of this mess. You ken that as well as I do."
He raised an eyebrow and leaned toward the older man.
"She takes a terrible risk."
Duncan took a long drink from the tankard in his hand and shrugged.
"So she'll use her gift."
It was a statement of fact, not a question, and required no answer from Connor, who simply continued to glare at the older man.
"It is what she does, laddie, as did her mother and her mother before her. She doesna deny who she is."
Duncan took another long drink and smiled.
"'Tis not good reason to waste such fine ale."
Duncan strode to the far end of the table, placing his hand on Connor's shoulder as he sat down next to him.
"It's not she doesna ken the risk to her if she does this, Connor. It's that well she kens the risk to all of you if she does nothing. You must remain here with your sister, laddie." "Aye, it's my duty to see her protected and happy." Duncan lowered his head, speaking quietly. "You ken there are men who would follow you, men who would fight for you if you choose to oppose your uncle. To take back what's rightfully yours, you do have a choice."
"And how many would die then, Duncan? How many innocents would be caught in the middle of that great battle?
We've been over this many a time. I'm not willing to sacrifice the lives of so many of my people."
Connor groaned, dropping his head back down to his arm.
"It disna matter, Duncan. I failed my family yet again. Rosalind was right. In order to save Mary without bringing death to my people, I had no choice but to risk my aunt's use of the magic."
He shook his head, sighing with resignation, and sat up straight.
"Rosalind bids us leave this night. She'll be down soon."
"She's down." Both men jumped to their feet at the authoritative sound of the female voice coming from the entryway. A tall, blonde woman, with a bearing equally as authoritative as her voice, strode toward them.
"Quiet your sulking, Connor. We've been through all this. You ken it's the only way out. I promise you, this will be the answer to all your problems. Do you hate the trinket I requested?"
Rosalind MacKiernan smiled at her nephew, ignoring his glare much as Duncan had. Fully expecting his compliance with her earlier instructions, she held out her hand.
"Aye."
Connor reached into his sporran and handed over a small velvet pouch. Rosalind opened the little bag and dumped the contents into her hand.
"Oh, very good, Connor. It's exactly the piece I had hoped you would choose."
She glowed with happiness as she lifted the emerald pendant, light from the candles reflecting in the facets of the jewel.
"I remember when Dougal gave this to your mother. It was at the dinner when they announced they were to be married."
Her soft blue eyes glazed over with memory for a moment as she began to turn away, but she quickly turned back.
"Oh, I almost forgot."
She smiled at her nephew then in a way that always worried him.
"I need a small something of yours."
Again she held out her hand expectantly. Seeing his momentary confusion, she explained.
"Something of yours, Connor. Something personal. The magic will not work without it."
She paused and looked around the great hall.
"I know. Your plaid.
A piece of your plaid will do nicely." At his frown she sighed. "Just a small bit, Connor. Honestly, nephew, must you make everything a battle?" Connor shook his head, knowing it would do him no good to argue. He tore a strip of material from the end of his plaid and handed it over to Rosalind. "I trust that's the last thing you'll be needin' of me, aunt." "Indeed it is." Rosalind paused, and Connor could feel the forces of fate gathering around him. "Well, except for your presence at the glen." She looked remarkably innocent for someone so devious. Duncan choked and spit out the ale he had just taken into his mouth.
"The Faerie Glen," he managed to croak. "Oh, I should have guessed that was where you'd be wanting to go."
He looked to Connor.
"You may ha' had the right of this, laddie. I'll go see to the horses."
He paused and raised an eyebrow.
"And just where do I tell the others we'll be headed? Your uncle will ask them when we've gone, you ken."
Connor considered this for only a moment.
"Tell them we head to the port in Cromarty. We'll be back within a fortnight."
Duncan McAllister, although easily 25 years Connor's senior, was closer to him than any man alive. The grizzled warrior had served Connor's father from his youth. Only Duncan could be trusted with the truth of their destination. Duncan nodded.
"Lady Rosalind?"
He bowed slightly in her direction.
"I'll be in the courtyard, awaiting your readiness."
"I suppose it's the Clooty Well you'll be wantin'?" Connor's ice-blue eyes reflected his irritation. He shook his head in disgust.
"I will regret this, I am sure," he muttered.
Rosalind beamed at her nephew. "Me things are at the foot of the stairs. You can take them out and see that Duncan has our horses ready. I'll join you shortly." Watching Connor stomp out of the great hall, Rosalind smiled. How like his father he was, both of them handsome and strong, just as her own father had been. Both of them clung rigidly to ideals of right, wrong, honor, and responsibility to the family. Both held themselves to standards higher than those against which they measured anyone around them. Those lofty ideals had brought her older brother an early death on a lonely battlefield. She would do anything in her power to prevent that same fate for Connor. Knowing the sacrifices her nephew had already made for his family and the burdens he carried, she loved him all the more. This one time, however, she wanted Connor to get what he needed. She carefully tucked the strip of cloth from his plaid into the velvet pouch with the emerald necklace and tied the strings, smiling broadly. She had very special plans for that little piece of cloth, and for her nephew. When they reached the Faerie Glen, she would tap into the source of the power and say the words that would allow the magic to travel within the pendant, guiding it wherever it needed to go to find the very special one it sought. Chapter 2. Denver, Colorado, present day. Damn it! Why couldn't I do something, say something? Caitlyn Coryell slammed her front door and threw her keys across the room where they bounced off the wall. This is just great. Now she was talking out loud to herself. Surely just one more thing for Richard to criticize. Just who do you think you are? That's what I should have said to Richard. Kate shook her head. I should have said something, anything to Richard. Instead, she'd just let him usher her out like she was a small child, like nothing at all had happened. Kate walked woodenly down the hall to her bedroom, kicking off her sandals and tossing all her packages onto the middle of her bed. She went back to the living room, flopped onto the sofa, pulling her legs up until she could rest her forehead on her knees. I'm so pathetic. Maybe Richard is right. Wasn't he always? Maybe it was all her fault. If she could just be more... More what? She mumbled, absently twisting the diamond ring on her left hand. Not more. Less. Less like me. Kate heaved a deep sigh and sat up. Less afraid. Afraid and powerless to make even the simplest decision. I sound like a sulky little girl. She picked up the telephone and dialed. The hollow echo of the telephone ringing sounded for the third time. Pick up. Jessie should be in his room by now. It had to be around midnight in Barcelona. She needed him to answer. Though she was close to all three of her older brothers, she was closest to Jessie. He wasn't just her brother. He was her best friend. There was no reason for him to still be out. They had contacted the office this morning. The mission had gone well, and the hostages were safe. The team should have been at the hotel long ago. Fourth ring. Come on, Jess. Pick up. Pick up. Pick up. Kate paced anxiously across the living room, stopping to tuck a box of tissues firmly under her arm. She'd need them for the good cry she was planning later. Fifth ring. Pick up the phone! Kate yelled desperately just as she heard the answering click on the other end of the line.
Whoa there, no need to... Kate, is that you? What's wrong?
Jessie's sleepy confusion was evident. Sorry, Jess, I was just being impatient. Nothing's wrong. Unless you count finding my fiance having sex on his desk with his receptionist the week before our wedding as something.
Well, baby sister, you dragged me out of bed. What time is it, anyway? What's going on?
That was more like her, Jessie. He sounded annoyed. Maybe calling Jessie wasn't the smartest thing for her to do, but she had already started. Richard said... That is, we sort of had a disagreement, and... Well, I've been thinking about what Richard said, and... Her voice trailed off as she vividly recalled the disagreement. She had thought to surprise Richard with a picnic lunch, since he'd told her he was too busy to get away from the office and meet her. He was busy, all right. And all three of them had certainly been surprised. The blonde on the desk had screamed, and Kate had dropped the basket of food, lemonade darkening the pale, thick carpet after the glass container shattered. Jessie's voice brought her back to the present.
Answer me, Kate. What did he do? You say the word, and I am so on the next plane home. I'll have my foot up his ass before he can even think of another thing to say.
At least Jessie was completely awake now. No, Jess, you know I don't want that. Not that her brother couldn't do it, with his black belts in God only knew how many martial arts. She closed her eyes and watched it all happening again. She had backed out of the office into the hallway, but couldn't seem to think to move from the spot outside Richard's door. This couldn't be happening to her. The door had opened, and Richard had grabbed her arm, pulling her into the office as the blonde receptionist sidled past on her way out. She didn't even have the courtesy to look embarrassed. "Why?" she had asked him, hating the hurt in her voice. "Why would you do this to me?"
I wasn't doing anything to you, Caitlyn. It meant nothing. You know I'm under pressure with the new cases I've taken on. How many times have I asked you to have sex with me? If you had, I wouldn't have been forced to find my relief elsewhere.
"You're blaming that?" She pointed to the desk, unable to find the words to describe what she'd seen. "That behavior on your work?" Richard had led her to the large leather sofa in his office, waiting for her to be seated before he perched himself on the arm. Always the perfect gentleman.
No, if there's any fault to be placed here, it's yours. I'm a man with needs. I've made that clear to you.
Kate shook her head to banish the memory. On second thought, it might not be a good idea to share the whole scenario with her brother. Besides, Richard says it's my fault anyway.
That's bullshit. Richard's full of it, and you deserve better than him.
Jessie always ended up here when they talked about Richard. All I need from you is, I need to ask you a question, and I need your promise that you'll be completely honest with me. Will you do that? She might as well get on with this.
That's what big brothers are for, Katie Rose. I excel at being honest, given the chance. Fire away.
Richard says I'm not adventurous, that I'm stuck in a rut, doing the same things day after day, until I'm not even living life anymore. My fault? She'd asked Richard. How can your doing that possibly be my fault? Richard had given her that haughty look she'd seen him use on others in the past, The waiter who took too long to bring the wine, or the sales clerk who didn't jump fast enough. You live life like some kind of spinster. The only thing you show any enthusiasm for is Coryell Enterprises. I constantly have to take a back seat to your daddy's company and your work there.
What my father and brothers do is important. They risk their lives to save people.
I'm not saying it isn't important, Caitlyn. I'm saying that you treat me as if it's more important to you than I am. You have no adventure of your own. You spend 10 to 12 hours a day running that office, coordinating everything that goes on there. You deal with some of the most powerful people in the world, but look at you. You're in a rut. You don't fix yourself up unless I remind you to. What am I supposed to think? How can I pursue a career in politics without a wife at my side who understands my needs? One who's willing to sacrifice for my career?
I'm adventurous.
She desperately grasped at the only part of his censure she could, her stomach clenching in horror as he criticized her passion for her work, the one thing she truly felt she excelled at. His cold laughter stung. Really? Then prove it. If you have any adventure in you at all, you'll have sex with me right here, in this office, right now. He'd stood then, straightening his tie. But you aren't up to that, are you? That's simply too out of the ordinary for Caitlyn Coryell.
Her fault. He'd said it was all her fault. Do you think he could be right?
She hated the wimpy pleading note she heard in her voice. There was a long pause on Jessie's end. Okay, fine. You know I don't like Richard. I never have. How many times have I told you he's not right for you? You want honesty? Well, here it is. No, honey, you aren't adventurous anymore. Your last big adventure ended up with you ass over end flying off a horse. She shuddered at the painful reminder. It had been so exciting to sneak out for a ride on her father's horse, at least for the first few minutes. What is it they say? It's all fun and games until somebody almost gets killed. She'd spent weeks recovering from that accident. But more important, Katie, is the change in you since you met Richard. The longer you've dated this guy, the more withdrawn you've become. You're so busy trying to be exactly what he wants you to be, you're like some Richard robot. You should listen to yourself talk. You can't go more than 5 minutes without a Richard says in your conversation. Jessie was on a roll. You fix your hair the way Richard wants. You attend the society functions Richard wants. You're forever starving yourself trying to lose weight because Richard wants. You wear the clothes Richard wants. Hell, you aren't even going to wear Grandma's wedding dress, and you and I both know you've wanted to do that your whole life.
Richard said he only wanted the best for me, that he loved me.
She barely noted that she'd referred to him in the past tense. I am so sorry to be the one to say this to you, but it's way past time someone did. Richard doesn't love you. Anyone can see it. If he did, he wouldn't be trying to change everything about you. You're great just the way you are. Richard only loves Richard and the Coryell money. That and all the potential political allies he can meet through Coryell Enterprises. He's slime, Katie, and you need to drop him like a bad habit. Jessie stopped to draw in a ragged breath.
He's simply an ambitious lawyer.
She defended him now, out of habit, though that wasn't really much of a defense for the man she was supposed to love more than anything. Lawyer or not, Richard is just plain slime of the earth. And, Katie? Jessie waited until he knew he had her attention. I don't really believe you love him either. I haven't seen you seriously happy since you agreed to marry this creep. I think you just want to be in love because you think it's supposed to happen now. But love doesn't happen on a schedule. It sneaks up when you least expect it. You can't plug it into that little day planner of yours. You can't make it happen. You need to ask yourself some pretty serious questions about how you honest to God feel before that wedding next week.
Okay, enough.
Thanks for your honesty. I know you don't understand my relationship with Richard. She paused and took a deep breath. How could he understand? She wasn't sure she understood why she'd agreed to marry Richard.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?